got your cup of coffee, huh? Is it old?
So that's a fun story sometime.
I want to hear it.
All right, it's 6 o'clock. Let's like.
All right, it is 6 o'clock, so we can call our meeting to order, and thank you all for being here this evening. This is going to be a presentation that we have first made by our city manager, Strauss, with respect to our first budget meeting and hearing. And so, City Manager Strauss, you are on, sir.
Well, thank you, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, and to our public that are joining us, and our department heads and staff members that are in the room tonight. We appreciate everyone's attendance for a very important discussion. And so, again, good evening. Tonight, per the city charter, I, along with city staff, will be presenting a proposed fiscal year 2023 budget for consideration by the City Commission. We will have an overhead presentation, and so as I go through the presentation, you will be able to follow along there. For the Commission, you also have a printed copy in the folders that have been distributed to your seats. As you will all recall, the budget development process began with the City Commission's strategic planning retreat that occurred on February 23rd and February 24th. And was followed then on July 25th by a City Commission budget workshop. Now, there was a lot of work that occurred in the time there between, and since that time leading to tonight, and I want to thank all of our city departments and staff for all of the budget development work that has occurred throughout this timeline. And it does bring us to tonight, September the 8th, and this is our first public budget hearing, and certainly it will be followed by a second public hearing and an adoption hearing on September 22nd, and the budget would take effect on October 1st. The proposed budget, as always, includes several necessary assumptions, and so to begin the discussion for the budget, I want to cover those assumptions for the Commission and for the public. The proposed budget includes budgeted property value growth in fiscal year 2023 of 14.66%. Now, that budgeted amount or percentage comes from the property appraiser's office, and we have been informed that that would be the percentage increase that we should budget for. It also estimates property value growth in both fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 at a conservative 4%. The proposed budget also meets the requirements for general fund revenues and surplus reserves to be maintained at a minimum of 45 to 60 days cash on hand by fiscal year 2025. The proposed budget also proposes to adopt a proposed millage rate at the maximum advertised amount based upon the expenditures proposed of 5.7649 mills. The budget also includes a maximum increase of 2.5% in controllable expenditures. And I just want to comment again to our city department directors and staff. That's a hard task to accomplish. The city government is no different than the rest of the community. We have all experienced increases in fuel cost, labor cost, and materials that we're all aware of. And so for staff to be able to keep the controllable expenses at 2.5% or below is great work by city staff and is very much appreciated. The proposed budget also includes a 5% increase in health insurance rates for calendar year 2023. And when I stated that calendar year is what that means. It's different than the fiscal year. Those increases would begin with the calendar year, not the fiscal year on October 1st. Instead, it would be January 1st. And certainly that is based mostly upon our experience with our healthcare provider and our coverages necessary. The proposed budget also provides for a proposed merit increase for eligible general employees of 2.5%. For our collective bargaining units and employees, their proposed merit increases would be based upon their existing collective bargaining agreements. The proposed budget also provides for an across-the-board salary adjustment for general employees of 5%, and for the collective bargaining employees, again, that would be based upon their existing collective bargaining agreements. I do think that with the 5% proposed across the board, I want to add some context and some information to that request and that proposal. First of all, I would ask the Commission and the public to recall that back in fiscal year 2021, none of the general employees received an across-the-board or a merit increase because at that time we were facing the unknowns of COVID, and so we were being careful and conservative, and we did not provide any pay increases for across-the-boards or merits in that year. Now, as you can imagine, the result of that is it has set us behind a little bit. When we look at our comparators out there in the market who did provide for those adjustments in that year, it set us behind, and we now are in a need to catch up. And that's because we're a little behind, but also because we're in the most active job market of our lifetime. And so to be able to retain our employees and recruit employees where necessary, it is why we're requesting the 5% across the board. Other information that we have used to justify that proposal is the Florida Public Employers Personnel Information Exchange. This is an exchange of information across 95 different organizations in the state of Florida who participate in that information exchange. It is an average sampling of a number of positions and is not indicative of any specific position. But when you look at the averages of all of those positions studied across the 95 organizations, the data indicates that the City of Lakeland general employees are below the minimum range. We are under, as seen on the overhead, by 5.69%. So when you look at the pay range and you look at the bottom, the minimum, we are below that on an average at 5.69%. On the maximum end of the range, the top of that pay scale, we are under by 6.93%. So the 5% is certainly, I think, warranted here in order for us to stay competitive in the market, to again make sure that we are able to maintain the existing employees that we have and recruit other employees where necessary. Another point of comparison that I think we would want to take a look at is related to other relevant agencies that we often look to for consideration. And as you can see on the overhead there with our 5% proposed across the board, the state of Florida, that is actual. Their increase was 5.38%. That has happened and occurred in the state budget. For Polk County, they are proposing 5%, and of course they have to go through the similar process that we have in our budgeting process. And also when you look at the city of Winter Haven, they're also proposing a 5% across the board for their employees as well. And there's no question that we do compete for employees with not only the state, but more importantly with the county and with the city of Winter Haven. In the past 2 years, we're going to move on now from the request for the ATB and the merits for the general employees. And in the past 2 years, city management, I think you hopefully has realized, has been very intentional about developing budgets that are guided by the initiatives that come from the City Commission's strategic planning. I'm going to go through all of the target areas that are contained in the strategic plan, and I want to highlight some of the associated strategic expenditures that are included in this proposed budget. In target area 1, related to infrastructure, the proposed budget includes over $2 million in expenditures. These expenditures are associated with projects like adding electric vehicle chargers at Bonnet Springs Park, the expansion of our ICASP system, which is the Intersection Collision Avoidance Safety Program that you are all familiar with. There is included a Providence Road Complete Street project. There are some traffic signalization upgrades included. And there is also a $1.5 million project for the South Wabash Avenue extension. In target area 2, related to economic development, we have proposed in the budget over $3.4 million of funding for related projects to economic development, and these include some pretty significant cost. We have about over $1.8 million in the Oak Street mixed redevelopment and public parking garage project. We have $100,000 for the development of the Catalyst 2.0 project. We have $450,000 for manufacturing and research initiative programs. We have over $1 million for a drainage improvement program or project to Hamilton Road and Medola Road. We also have $100,000 in an Elevate incubator that you might recall from the airport, and this is to a partnership with the Aerospace Center for Excellence and Polk State College, which helps to support startup businesses in the aviation industry. Also in target area 2 under economic development, but related to education, we have over $534,000 that is proposed in the budget. And these are for partnerships with Polk County Schools for the Flying Classroom that we have discussed. Also the ACES High Aerospace Center for Excellence program, our own Power Academy at Tenorock High School. We have over $108,000 that is proposed for internships, and you will recall our past discussions about our desire to increase internships here at the City of Lakeland, and we have accomplished that, and the proposed amount there will allow us to continue that endeavor. We also have funding for a Big Brothers Big Sisters mentoring program that we are hosting here at the City of Lakeland, where many of our employees are partnered with a young man or young lady as a big brother and big sister. And then we also have an increased amount for tuition reimbursement for our City of Lakeland employees. Again, going back to the discussions about retention and recruitment, we certainly want to provide for funding so that our employees can continue their own professional development, education, and growth. In target area 3, another significant target area, and this is for affordable housing, we have over $3.7 million that's in this proposed budget. That funding would be used for the construction of multifamily rental units through financing for qualified builders and loan programs to private developers who would develop those multifamily rental units. In target area 4, under City Hall communications, we have a little over $178,000 that is proposed in this budget. These will be for things that we have discussed in the past, at least in discussions I've had with commissioners, and some have been publicly discussed. For instance, our employee engagement survey that I mentioned just a few months ago, there's funding provided for us to accomplish that in this next budget. Also, our very important annual citizen survey, where we survey the community and get their responses related to the City of Lakeland, which is then provided as part of the discussion through the strategic planning retreat that we have. There's also expenses included in there for onboarding our new City of Lakeland public service employees and other staff recognition programs and professional development opportunities for staff. Target area 5 related to parks and recreation, included in this proposed 2023 budget, is about $985,000. This is for a water education and conservation program at the Florida Children's Museum, which will be located at Bonnet Springs Park. We also have a 7 wetlands education center funding arrangement here, but as you were recently notified, this is through a grant that we are receiving that was approved through the Florida legislature. And we're happy to receive that, and we thank all of the efforts that went into that from not only staff, but the folks that we utilize up in Tallahassee to try to receive those types of grant opportunities. In target area 7, this would be the most significant budget impact in the proposal related to the target areas, and this is in the area for target area for public safety. We have over $9.2 million that is proposed in the budget. The majority of that funding would go toward the 12 fire personnel, the related capital expenditures for a fire station and equipment, and some capital needs. Also, 13 Lakeland Police Department personnel and some of the associated capital there. And then there are 2 Lakeland Police Department personnel positions that would be funded through the CRA, and those 2 particular positions or officers would be providing services within the boundaries of the CRA district. So that is, again, the most significant proposal that is related to the target areas from the strategic plan. In addition to the strategic planning initiatives that I just covered, and that last one completes the coverage of that, in addition to that, there are also some commission initiatives that we have recently discussed, and this is primarily because of requests that you have received from different partners and stakeholders in the community. And so in the proposed budget is $236,000 annually over a 3-year period that could end up being longer for a request that was initially led by the chamber, but instead in order to provide for the services and small business type loans that the chamber has requested, there would be a partnership between our CRA, the BBIC, the Black Business Investment Corporation, and Prospera. And so that funding would provide for that through the CRA. And then also, as discussed with the commission, though not at the amount that was initially requested, there is included a proposal for a $100,000 increase in the cultural arts funding, and that would be from $275,000 to $375,000 only proposed for the fiscal year 2023 budget, and that would be for the cultural arts funding for the Mayor's Council of the Arts request and funded from the general fund. Just to give you some discussion about our staffing levels, just to try to take a look at where we have been historically, looking back to last year. You will see on the overhead that we have increased, or we are proposing, I should say, to increase staff by 40 people, and 27 of those are related to the police and fire requests that I covered just a moment ago. There are 13 other positions that we propose to add, and those are mostly related to growth. So for instance, with the population increase that we're experiencing, with all of the construction and development that is occurring both residentially and commercially, there is an increased need for water and wastewater service, and so we need to increase our staff level in the water utility. The airport, you're all very familiar with the growth that has occurred out there, commercial type growth, and so we need to add a couple of positions there, and there are some other positions that are again associated to increased service levels that are provided by the city that are needed and necessary because of the growth in both commercial and residential population. Speaking of population, and just to kind of highlight the comments that I just made, what you can see now on the overhead is the information and data that comes from BEBR, the Bureau of Economic and Business Research out of the University of Florida. And you can see that over the last 2 years in the city limits of Lakeland, we have had an increase of over 7,600 people. And so with increased population, as I mentioned, comes the need for increased services and the justification for adding personnel and some of the associated expenses there as well. And that has occurred over the last 2 years. Now, I do not show any data here for commercial growth, but we're all familiar and aware of the commercial growth that we have experienced during that time frame. So with that, I'm going to transition now over to our finance director, Mike Brossart, and Mike is going to present now an overview of the city's revenues and expenses. Mike?
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
The best part of the presentation for you, I'm sure. What I'm going to do is to keep you awake is just hit the highlights of changes over what you saw last year and what you approved last year. The biggest jump we have on the charges for services is slightly over $90 million higher than last year. The biggest reason for that is fuel and purchase power. Not surprising, right? We've got to bill that out and charge it back. And so Lakeland Electric has built their budgets based on what is now being projected. So that's the biggest jump that we see there. Okay. All other revenue, that was 116 million last year, so that's taken a sizable drop. The biggest part of that is impact fees and some debt revenues that we received associated with the RICE engines that we were installing. So expected to drop. The only other, let's see, we actually got two other changes on here. The intergovernmental, the grants, that's 31 million. That was $65 million higher last year. 42 of that was related to the Lake Bonnet grant that we received from the state. So just grants. These are just grants between years. The only other change is property taxes. Now that is general fund and all of the CRAs. That's about $9 million higher than it was last year. Okay? So fuel and purchase power, again, that's up. We're I think just the fuel and purchase power portion of it's close to 88 million higher than it was last year. Personnel is up about 10 million over last year. Part of that is filling vacancies, part of that is growth, part of that is the new positions that are proposed in this budget as well. Capital outlay is down about $140 million. Again, that's associated with the RICE engines. Just we had borrowed most all the money, or the money last year, set it aside, and so that's the biggest piece there. Okay, so you can slide on the next slide. Property taxes, again, as we talked about that, the $8 million of the $9 million increase is directly related to the general fund, with the other $1 million coming from going into the CRAs. Utility dividends are up about $1.5 million over last year. Charges for services are up, but that's just procedural because the RP Funding Center is now being tracked in the general fund. And so that's up about $6 million over last year. Grants have changed just slightly. Nothing else on there that changed much from last year. So you can go to the general fund expenses, please. So here, most of what the changes are associated with the new proposed new hires and the expenses associated with all of the new hires that are in the budget for fire and for police. We've got normal cost increases for personnel and payroll. That's probably about $800,000 in parks, and Public Works is up slightly. Other than that, everything stayed fairly flat to last year. Actually, we're recognizing that the Lakeland Electric is putting more LEDs in, and what we're seeing is actually a slight drop in the amount of what we're paying for street lighting. And that's been a nice drop of $300,000 or $400,000. So, but anyway, that's a highlight of what we see in those slides. So. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, there among many other things that were discussed quite thoroughly at our strategic planning retreat and at the budget workshop, there were really two major discussions that I think we should reconsider or at least discuss again tonight. And the first one is related to the operating subsidies at the RP Funding Center. And so, first of all, when we had our strategic planning retreat, the commission requested that we consider seeking a management company to come in and propose how they might manage the center differently, and what that could result in terms of trying to reduce or remove the subsidy from the city's budget. And as you're all aware, we went through that process. We went through a very extensive and thorough RFP process. We had on-site meetings. We had multiple different agencies that perform those types of services that attended. We were complimented by many of them on the process. Ultimately, however, though, we did not yield a proposal from a significant management company to take on those services. And in their responses to us, when we sought out why we did not get any responses from them, it was mostly about a business decision for them. They do not feel or believe that there is an opportunity for them to profit in the way that they would need to in managing the type of events that occur at the RP Funding Center. And so what we've talked about is we now have a plan to change our business model at the RP Funding Center. And as the commission and the public may have previously heard, what that's going to entail is we're going to shift our business model from where we will be, the city will not be the ones that will be promoting different events that we've had there before. Things like the Broadway series, things like Classic Albums Live. Instead, we're going to shift our business model to make it a rental facility. Now, that does not mean that we won't have Broadway type shows or even Classic Albums Lives or similar type concerts, but it will just mean that it won't be the city who is the one promoting it, paying for it, and then taking the risk that we might break even or even lose money. Instead, we're going to let those types of acts come in with promoters who will rent our facility, and we will be able to cut expenses that way, and we believe that we will be able to generate revenues that are greater than what we are currently generating with that type of business model. Now, that's going to take a time to transition into that because we have already booked events at the RP Funding Center that go into this next budget, about halfway through. So it'll be halfway through the 23 budget before we can really fully make that shift. And so what you see on the overhead, I just wanted to give you kind of a history of the subsidy that has been being provided for the operations at the RP Funding Center. You can see back in FY21, it was $3.8 million. In FY22, it was reduced to 1.85. Now, Mike touched on that a few moments ago. You know, there was a change there where we shifted the expenditures for the general services provided at the RP Funding Center over to our enterprise funds. And now the enterprise funds pay for those, which results in a savings to the general fund. And so that's why you see that significant drop from 21 to 22. In this proposed budget for FY23, based on just a portion of the year where we can change that business model that I just talked about, we are proposing 1.8 would be the subsidy. And then in FY24, again in FY24, we will have fully shifted to that rental model that I spoke of, and we are proposing or stating that we can drop the subsidy, we think conservatively, to the $1.265 million. The next topic that we're going to address is related to public safety, because again, the two conversations that were very significant through strategic planning and through our budget workshop were related to the RP Funding Center and to public safety. So when we had the discussions related to fire and police at the strategic planning session, Chief Riley and fire staff were able, and at that time presented local data indicating the need for another fire station, the equipment and personnel that would go along with that. And so you saw that local data. When we talked about the request and the needs being presented from the Lakeland Police Department, we talked a lot about some national models and how in these national models there are three that are widely accepted, and they plug in data, and a lot of that data is related to growth, it's related to calls for service and the like. But through that discussion, we really talked more at a national level and the impacts and the reasoning behind then our related request, which again has a lot to do with growth. But tonight, Chief Garcia is going to now present some more of that localized data specifically related to our experience in calls for service and our call times, which all then equate to our level of public service, for public safety, and is certainly impactful on the quality of life to our citizens here in the Lakeland community. So with that, I'm going to recognize Chief Garcia for his presentation.
Good evening, Chief Ruben Garcia for the record.
Good evening.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the data that went into the formulas we talked to you about back at the planning retreat. One of the main indicators we look at is calls for service, and here you can see from back to 2014, those have been trending up except for 2020. We all know what happened there. That was the COVID year. Folks were locked inside their house. Some of the greatest crime prevention we've had in a while, but other than that, that was one of the few good side effects of that. But when we come back into 21, we see that spike go right back up, and then in this year in 22, we're seeing it at pace to outpace 21. So we see the calls for service continuing to rise. Calls for service, just looking at them by themselves is not enough. What is important to realize is a lot of these calls, primarily the calls that we run a lot, are 2-3-man cars that go on those calls. So when you see those calls for service, I don't want you to think that's just one patrol car handling that call. Some of these calls, robbery for instance, may take a perimeter. You may have 4 or 5 cars, a K-9, a supervisor out there. So each one of those calls just does not represent one person. So when you see that volume of calls that we work throughout the year, some of those are multiple units going to those calls at one time. So just as reference, that's some of the calls we work. The crashes is another big indicator that we look at throughout the year on our dashboard, and as you can see, those continue to rise, unfortunately, as well. Very important, traffic control, traffic enforcement, as well as responding to our typical normal crimes that we work. Those injuries occur, actually, we probably have more injuries in traffic crashes than we do in criminal offenses. So the traffic crashes are very important to us. Obviously, police officers in the field working that are a good deterrent for that. So that's one of the other indicators that go into those formulas we looked at. This is probably the most telling chart that I'll show you tonight. The orange being our dispatch calls. Those are the calls that officers are responding to, the 911 treadmill, if you will. Calls are coming in, they're responding to them, completely reactive to what's going on. The blue is proactive. That's when they have the opportunity really to make a difference. They have an opportunity to go out and work with citizens, have an opportunity to be proactive, to go out and seek those violators that are causing harm in the community. What you can see there is the bulk of the day is spent running those 911 calls or running those called in calls, those dispatch calls, and that is purely reactive to what is going on. We're not solving a problem when we're in the orange zone. We're solving problems when we're in the blue zone. Ideally, we want to be at about 1/3 blue, 1/3 orange, and 1/3 administrative. And administrative would cover everything from your sick leave, your court time, and all those different jobs that bring them away from the road, as well as away from the call dispatch. But what you can see here is we start pretty heavy about 7 o'clock in the morning, and these guys and gals don't get much of a break till about 1 o'clock in the morning. That's a good thing to get a break because they get to usher home all the bar patrons about that time. So they're still busy, they're just not generating a lot of calls for service. But that's a different kind of busy. They go into about that 1:30 till usually about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, making sure everyone gets home safe from their night out. Really, the only lull we see in that is really from about that 4 to 5 in the morning. 10 years ago, that chart looked a lot different. You didn't rarely get a call till about 10 o'clock in the morning if you were on day shift. And in the evening shift, that peaked off at about 10 or 11 o'clock, and you could do a lot of that blue work after that time. Now you see they run those calls all night long. You can listen to the radio. It's not uncommon for them to call continuously for a unit to come into service to answer a call. And that's a citizen at the end of that call waiting for help that we're not able to get to. So it's important, very important, that we have enough people out on the road to get to those calls. So that's where we're at currently with the calls that are coming in. We look at our calls in 3 different ways and 3 different priorities. One being life is at stake in those calls. Those are our priority 1 calls. We try to get to all of those within 7 minutes. If you're on the other end of that, 7 minutes is probably a pretty long time. Fortunately, that's an average. A lot of them they get to in less than a minute. Some of them they get to obviously in over 7 minutes, depending if we're in one of those hard orange zones. But those quality of life calls are usually about those P2 calls. That's that poor guy or gal that's worked all day that's waiting for an officer to come out and work that burglary that's in their house. They're out there, you know, waiting, sometimes waiting an hour for us to get out there. That 12 minutes of response time is deceiving because a lot of those are responded to in 2 or 3 minutes, and of course that changes the average. But every month those lieutenants go back and look at those and they try to figure out, you know, what took us so long to get to some of these calls. And we have a lot of calls in that middle bracket that wait a long time. Those are the same people that call my office and call your office, quite frankly. Their quality of life issues that, you know, anything from vandalism or a burglary that's passed the curb where there's not a suspect on the scene. It's not life-threatening, but, you know, it's hugely important to the folks we serve. And lastly, our priority 3 calls are just that. They're usually civil matter, traffic accident without injuries, something of that nature. Somebody ran over somebody's mailbox. There's not life at jeopardy. We've got time to get there. But that's the way we look at the calls. We're getting to those priority ones. We're getting to them a lot of times because these folks are leaving the call their own, going and handling that priority one, coming back to the call their own. That's not the best business model to start with, but they're getting it done in the field with the personnel that we have to get it done with. But where it concerns me is that those P2s, those quality of life calls that folks are probably waiting too long for us to get to. And that's because we're deep into that orange that you saw on the other slide.
Okay.
That doesn't apply to me.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for the presentation, and certainly as we move forward with the discussions after the initial presentation, Chief and staff will be available to answer you know, any other questions. And you know, I do though want to start on this particular what has been proposed in the budget with the 13 police officers, and just kind of go back to, you know, how did we get there? If you might recall, when we had our strategic planning retreat, the indication was that we needed 30. And how did we get to needing 30, and how did we get to needing 30 all in 1 year? Well, we, like many other agencies, because of the very difficult job that our law enforcement officers deal with on a daily basis, recruiting in law enforcement is very difficult. And we went through 3 or 4 years there where on average of those years, we had about 15 positions for police officers that we were unable to fill. And so it was difficult to think about coming in to ask for additional positions when you can't fill the 15 or so that on an annual basis. But with our HR department's assistance, the police department became very innovative in their recruitment efforts, and that helped us start to fill those positions. In addition to that, the commission will remember that in the last contract with our collective bargaining unit at the police department, there were some significant pay increases that were justified and warranted and needed for us to be able to compete. So those 2 things helped us recruit and fill those positions. What we haven't solved for, though, over that same period of time is the growth that we have been experiencing. So now when we start to look at, well, how do we provide public safety at levels that provide that good quality of life related to public safety, then that's how we get to the need that we have now. And so what from that initial request from 30, when we got to the budget workshop, my recommendation was that we scale that down to initially the 13 that are proposed in the budget now. And then over these next several years, we can assess each year whether the need is still there or whether we have been able to maybe find other innovations or other use of technology that may lessen that request. So I just wanted to add a little context to how we got from an initial request for 30, why so many at one given time, and how we got to where we are tonight. And then also moving on from that discussion, but again, we can come back to it when the commission has their deliberations and discussions. Wanted to also just show a historical reference to the millage rates that are associated with the funds needed for the budget, just to give that historical perspective and just point out where you will see back in in 2015, from 2015 to 16, there was a significant increase in the millage rate at that time of almost 1 mil. So that was a significant increase at the time. When you go and you start looking at the years that progressed from there, we were for several years at the 5.5644 until 2019. In 2019, the commission at that time reduced the millage rate from the 5.5644 to 5.4644, and we remained at that until last year in 2022, when the commission again reduced the millage rate to 5.4323. So just a historical perspective of where we have been, and then certainly for 2023, what you see on the screen is what I explained earlier, which is the maximum based on what was advertised. With that, I'm going to yield back to our Finance Director, Mike Brossart, who will show you the ever popular cash day, our Days Cash worksheet that we're all so familiar with, but is a great tool. And Mike and Deidre and everyone in finance does a great job in using this tool for our benefit. So Mike.
Okay, we've put a blue line on it between 25 and 26 because our policy we had asked the commission to adhere to is 45 to 60 days cash on hand 3 years out. But it was one of the commissioners that asked during one of our discussions, like to see this 26 because it's still high in 25, but it's starting to burn fast. They wanted to see 26. So for this presentation, we've shown you the extra year as requested. As you'll note in the top left, this shows a 0.3326 mill increase, which is the maximum millage that we advertised, and that's to fund the 12 firefighters, the new fire station, and the 13 LPD personnel, as well as the assumptions that Sean talked about. And I think during some of our discussions, what we also talked about is it allowed for the filling of the additional 17 officers proposed over the next 3 years as well, by burning down some of the value increases that we've seen, especially this year, the 14.66. And that's how you can do both of those things that way. So we will absolutely, when we get to the point where you are going to deliberate and if you want to see other scenarios, then we've got this queued up, not in a PowerPoint, but in Excel, that we can work through that with you as well. So I'll slide back to you now.
The next slide, Mike, is going to be related to the millage.
Yep, that's me. Sorry. As we talked about during the budget retreat and then the workshop, the state has defined rules for a rolled back rate, which is simply what millage rate would you have to apply to garner the same property tax increases or revenues rather for that next year. So that'd be 4.9835. We're allowed to go 10% above that, and so that is that's a CPI that the state applies that gets you to 5.2890, which is the maximum for a simple majority. So anything above 5.2890 requires a supermajority. Okay. Our recommended millage was the 5.7649. That would require 5 as well. So current millage up through and including the proposed millage would require 5 affirmative votes. Okay.
With that, I will yield to our City Attorney, Palmer Davis.
Thank you. The action that the City Commission is required to take tonight is the adoption of a tentative millage rate ordinance and a tentative budget ordinance. So I'm going to go ahead and read the ordinance, the millage rate ordinance first. That's what you're required to take action on first this evening. And this ordinance is based on the millage rate of 5.7649. That is proposed ordinance number 22-040, an ordinance relating to ad valorem taxation. establishing the millage rate for the city of Lakeland, Florida for the fiscal year commencing October 1st, 2022 and ending September 30th, 2023, providing for the levy of ad valorem taxes, finding the millage rate is 15.68% greater than the rolled back rate, providing an effective date. And the proper action would be, if there is interest in that ordinance, a motion and a second, and then discussion followed by public comment.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to accept what's requested, but for further discussion.
So you make a motion to,
Be able to
Be
continue
able
the
to,
discussion.
yes,
yeah,
right,
have-
okay.
so we
And
have
is there a
discussion.
second? And a second from Commissioner McLeod. All right, who would like to begin the discussion? Commissioner Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Sherrouse and Mr. Brozart. And I think, in our one-on-ones, I've shared with you all, both of you all, and those that might be in the meeting with us, some particular challenge that I have with this particular proposed millage rate of 5.7649. But certainly, I know it's important that we need to do what's necessary for public safety, being number one for our community. But I wanted to see some scenarios as to how we can still provide support for what we need as far as our growth and the experience the growth that we have here in our Lakeland community, but maybe not do all of it at once. And I have a few questions, if I may ask those questions.
Sure, so what you'd like to do is propose that you look at some of the iterations?
Yes,
Yeah.
some other illustrations, that kind of thing. First of all, I guess we need to hear from our fire chief. As far as I know, I believe it's important that we look at Fire Station 8 and knowing that what our service calls call for and the time kind of thing that we deal with, especially on 98 North, as we've had that discussion here through our strategic planning time up to this point. But tell me, as far as the 12 positions that are proposed, do we need 12 in order to man that new station, or could it be 8? Could it be 10? I don't know. I need to know that. If it's 12 is what's necessary and deemed to be what's prudent to make sure that we have operational procedures in place for Fire Station 8, which I believe we need to have now. But is 12 the number that we need to have?
Yes, sir. Doug Riley, Fire Chief, for the record. Yes, sir. To open that fire station up day one takes 18 people. And the reason I say
How many again?
it takes 18.
18, okay.
And the reason I say that is because we will have an engine. Our minimum staffing on the engine, that means the lowest we'll ever go is 3. And we'll have a rescue truck for, the bulk of the medical calls. And the minimum we go there is 2. If you do the math there in 3 shifts, that's 15. But that's an additional, personnel that are going to be taking accrued leave and things like that. So we have to bake in there every one of our stations now, other than, Station 1, because they have more equipment. But typically our satellite stations will have 6 on per day. But 99.9% of the time we run with 5 a day. That's our minimum manning. But we have to staff with the extra to allow for all that time off with accumulated leave and things like that. So we're asking for 12 because the plan will be to relocate one of the rescues that are Station 3 today to Station 8 when we move it out there. Okay. And that will give us the numbers we need to run that station. Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's how we get to 12.
Yes, sir.
All right. That's one question for you. Now, my next question is, as far as the police department is concerned, and again, safety being an important, I think, element here and what we need to discuss, we have done very well, I think, for where we are. Crime statistics are showing that we're down, not up. Chief, I need you to come to the mic, please. I'm looking at, could we, and my take is, if I heard my finance director correctly in my discussions with him in my one-on-ones, he's sharing with me that we're probably looking at some kind of recession in the next 24 months from what he's heard and what he's read. And I'm thinking, well, okay, if we're looking toward a recession in 24 months from now, that's going to cause some changes in our way of doing things if our economy is going to have a decrease. And I'm looking at, well, if you want to increase millage rates and deal with situations such as that our citizens have to deal with out-of-pocket dollars, and boom, we're gonna have a recession in 24 months or less. I'm looking at that, in my mind, I'm thinking the impact. What kind of impact? So I'll go back to looking at what public safety is being the number one kind of element here, that we want to make sure we have our city protected and do things that need to be done for response time, et cetera. But I'm thinking, well, hey, if I'm gonna be looking at a recession here in the next 24 months or less, and I need these personnel for what we're seeing happening in our community, could we do, do we need 13? I know 30 is what's the numbers, I guess, that was shown to us statistically from growth patterns, but do we need 13? Could we deal with 8 right now and then see how things go in the next couple of fiscal years to see whether or not we warrant, additional numbers based on what we see the economy does. So I want to see, again, illustrations to say, hey, if I could do 8 to give my police department at least more manpower to be supportive in what needs to be done, and then maybe we can see how we can grow from there. And if that can help support the millage rate not being increased and to still help those who we look at and want to make sure they not be pinched as it would be, as my finance director has told me we would have a recession here in 24 months or less. How can we do it? So I asked, could we do instead of 13? Could we have 8? Could we have 7? Could we do a number that's less than the 13 to help support the numbers that we're looking at for as a millage kind of situation at best, but still give you more manpower to support what's needed in our community?
Yes, sir. We could do 8. We probably should have done the 8 back in about 2015.
Okay.
And every year we're getting further behind the 8 ball. 8 would go straight to patrol, and they would get right back up in that orange zone, and they wouldn't move the needle any in that blue. In this 13 that we proposed, 8 of those would go to patrol. 1 will go to our homeless liaison officer. We only have 1 officer working that throughout the entire city. That would give us 2. We have a critical need out in the SROs, the school resource officers, for some relief for those. As you know, through Margie Stoneman Douglas, we have to have an officer on those campuses the entire time that school's going on.
Yes, sir.
We don't have much of a relief factor in that unit, so we're eating away at our traffic unit in order to relieve those SROs when they have to be relieved. And as you saw, those blue lines and those traffic crashes are not slowing down. So we really need those traffic officers doing traffic out in the field. So that was important. And 2 more of those would go to our neighborhood liaison unit. And those guys and gals do function in that blue area most of the time trying to solve those quality of life issues. So the original estimation that we had through per capita was about 35 officers we were down. The DOJ model showed us at about 28. If I remember my numbers right, the Freesmore showed us at about 25 down. So 13 would be about a half of the least amount that was shown in the 3 studies we did. And that was just not blind studies. That was discussed throughout myself and the assistant chiefs. Just with those 4, you're looking at about 135 years of police service. I think we have a pretty good gauge on what we need to keep our ship afloat, and 13 would go a good ways in doing that.
Now, we had mentioned, I don't want to take all the conversation, but maybe I should stop.
No, finish. Go ahead, finish.
We have mentioned that once Fire Station 8 was up, running, and hopefully at that time, we would have our police personnel to be able to work out of sort of like a substation kind of thing in North Lakeland. So we would have, not to have, I guess, manpower out of the field for a great length of time, and we would not have to come all the way downtown to do reporting or doing whatever they can do to support getting them back in the field versus long time and longevity of time wasted. I don't want to say time is wasted now. Don't take it as a negative, but time that would be set there in a police station downtown where they can work north in a substation kind of a scenario to help curtail timing. Now I look at that, and I'm my years of being in law enforcement is 40 years ago, so, but 35, 40 years ago. But still, looking at that would be supportive, I would think, to help put whatever the numbers that we set here tonight to get people still back in the field much sooner. Would you not say that would happen?
Yes, sir. It would certainly be to our advantage to keep officers up in the north end of the city. There's quite a bit of admin time used running back and forth from those north calls to the station. But I don't know that moves the needle a whole police officer.
We won't know until.
It certainly saves some time for those units throughout the day, gives them more patrol time up there. It's certainly a value to have them up there, yes, sir.
And certainly, I think we all don't know what the future holds. We don't know. I'm just pointing some facts out that after talking with my finance director, who I've come to learn and believe what he tells me over the last 13 years. But I certainly will ensure that we do what I think is best for the entire city as a whole, especially our residents, who have to, of course, to deal with whatever increase or no increase as far as the millage rate is concerned for their pocketbooks as well. So if I can have a little illustrations, can I ask for an illustration?
Please go ahead. I'm going to tag on to the end of your comments when you're done, because I have a question in this regard.
Could I see an illustration then with, I don't know if it can be done, but if it can, then.
We've got, I assumed a number of things.
Okay.
It's in there, so Deidre's gonna pull it up, and if it's not something that's prepared, she can prepare it for you.
How can then we see an illustration still, I'm confident, and I heard what need to be done with the fire station still being part of our scenario, what's being proposed for the budget, of course, moving forward. And then the 12 personnel, but maybe police department having the number reduced. Could that be done in illustrations such as that at this point, Mr. Rosart?
Yes, sir.
What number?
The number would be 8.
The way I had understood it in talking to the chief a while back was, and Ruben, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was 1 lieutenant no matter what, and then iterations of 4 for officers, right?
For
the different
yes, sir.
shifts, right? So it would be 4 plus a lieutenant, 8 plus a lieutenant, or 12 plus a lieutenant, correct?
As you deploy in patrol, there's 4 squads, so
Right.
one person would be 4 for the patrol deployment.
Okay.
For the homeless liaison and the
That's
others.
kind of the way we've broken it down, is looked at it as, if we did a lieutenant and 4, lieutenant and 8, or lieutenant and 12 as was proposed. If that's okay, we can try to work through that. Now, one of the questions Deidre's going to need to have answered is, are you wanting to see this being covered by the millage or no millage, and just show the expenses?
No, I would say no millage would show me the expenses.
Okay, so make that 0 for the yellow.
That's me now, I can't speak for my other 6 people.
Make it 0.
Post-decimal. Yeah, there you go.
And then add the cost for the fire, and then for the 4 officers and the lieutenant to the fiscal year 23 budget.
That's amazing.
We'll blow that up too.
Yeah,
when you,
blow it up a little bit
yeah.
for me so I can be able to see. I can't see it.
While she's doing that, if I could tag on to, when you went on slide 24 that showed the red arrows and the multiple officers that are there, without this being too self-indicting, if you were looking at the quality of policing given current staff and a rating versus the quality of policing you could do if you had the 13 additional staff and the 2 that would be in the CRA funds, can you kind of move the needle for us a little bit on what that would be in some kind of range you define?
Absolutely, thank you. They're handling the calls. They're not handling the calls all the time to the quality we'd like to see the calls get handled to. And it's not from a lack of desire. They want to handle them that way, but they're going to the next call. A lot of times, these calls, if they had a little bit more time to follow up on those calls, they would solve the next 3 calls that guy or gal's going to call tomorrow. But they don't have time to do that because they got to get back in the orange zone and run the next call. So that is probably the biggest thing, the customer service aspect of it, being able to follow up on those calls and stopping those crimes that day they happen instead of those lingering. And, you know, it may be 2 weeks by the time they get to the detective bureau and get solved. That patrolman may have solved it that day had they had the time to follow up on that call. So the biggest thing we see in having enough personnel in the field is having enough personnel in the field to handle what is going on that day and not letting it spread out into the next day, the next week, the next month. So it's,
And so to me, that's material for us to consider. You know, it's easy when we don't have a crisis going on in the city in terms of safety to be, maybe we can cut it a little. But what if internally you know that we're not doing everything we ought to be doing now, that's important for us to be able to know that. And the other thing that we haven't really talked about is that on the ARPA side, if we were equipping the policemen, we have the funding uniquely now to be able to do that.
Yes.
For those vehicles to match what you have to have in place. So that takes you, instead of 13 vehicles or 15 vehicles, it takes you to 8 vehicles.
Right.
You know, because we have to match what we do. And that window goes away. Those are dollars in the citizens don't have to pay that are paid through the,
Yeah,
no.
and that's
Well, not on the capitalization side.
Capitalization's already there.
It's over.
every day.
Yeah. Any comments in that regard?
well, yes, sir. Obviously, a big initial first cost is getting the equipment to put the people in the field, and with an opportunity to leverage that certainly makes it an easier move at this point than it would be to do all of that. So, well, without being over dramatic, having these folks out in the field, and our 10 code would be 10-8 in service. That's the guy or gal who won't come into my call when I really have an emergency. I don't want somebody trying to leave a burglary. They're already working to get back in their car and get to me. I want them out there when I need them. If, you know, those worst case scenarios happen that we see on the news, we need police officers out in the field that are not otherwise obligated to handle those things. We're just talking about a couple of minutes, but everything goes bad in just a couple of seconds. So we need to keep them available out in the field. And that's where it comes to. We have enough officers because of their dedication to get the job done, but do we have enough to rise to those emergencies in a timely manner? They're going to get there. They're going to get cleaned up, but they could probably do a heck of a lot better job if they were already out in the field and ready to go.
Commissioner McCarley.
Just point of clarity for Mr. Brosart. So when it says days cash drop, that's 106 days minus 8, right? So we'd be at 96 cash?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
so that's just
Right.
if you see 8, that's the 114 less the 106, the difference between the two.
Right.
And that's just an indicator for me of how fast we are losing money
Yes.
with the current assumptions.
Right.
Those are going to change,
Yeah.
guaranteed.
Okay, any other questions, Commissioner Walker, on this?
I'm fine, thank you.
All right, other questions from other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sean and Mike and staff, Chief Garcia, everybody for being here tonight. It's good to see so many interested, engaged Lakelanders at a budget hearing on a Thursday evening, and we appreciate that. Mike, looking at the budget revenue numbers, the projections, you mentioned property tax revenues would be up $9 million from last year based on the 5.7 advertised millage rate. What would that be if we kept the millage rate at the 5.4? I know it'd still be up. I'm just trying to get an idea of that difference.
Should be pretty easy to figure out. If I take out the, Deidre, you can proof me on this if you want, but if I take out the millage increase, the budgeted revenues for '23 go down by slightly less than $3 million.
And this is leaving it as originally proposed with the
Yes,
fire and police.
right. Yeah,
So it's about a $3 million difference.
ish,
in
yeah.
property tax revenues, okay?
Yes.
I think that's important, and I think for this group, I know we may be in the question phase, but I do think we have to ask, can we fund this budget and the request, the public safety needs, which I think the chiefs have made an excellent case for.
Sure.
We want to make sure that we are giving you the resources and personnel that you need to serve our city. Can we do that under the current millage rate, given the spike in property values that we've seen? And I think that's a question that we need to explore.
Good point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So you're looking at, now your day's cash drop that are reflected now is just that change, correct? You pulled the police out.
No,
Yeah, they're in.
Police are in there.
They're in.
I mean the earlier 8 officer illustrations off. We're back to full illustration, just trying for clarity purposes. We're full illustration with no millage increase. That's all this change.
Okay, D, go to the green tab. Scroll down. Make make that 0. There you go. And have you changed anything on the expense side at all?
Okay, so that's
So
what
that's
you were after.
that's 12 firefighters, a station, 13 new LPD personnel, and not solving for the additional 17 to get to the 30. That's what you're looking at with the current assumptions.
And that,
Why do you not have the 17 to get to the 30?
Well, we can add those if you want. You've not asked us to, so we're not going to assume that.
Are you holding it?
The original request.
It depends, sure, and going back to Commissioner Walker saying, we don't know. We don't
No, we
know.
don't know.
Right.
We will likely, I think you could assume, need to get to that 30, but I think I liked what our city manager said about each year. We
We have to
evaluate
review.
and see where we
Sure,
are.
sure.
Well, we can show you. Deidre, if you go ahead under the additional police, just put in the blue there, in cell F20. Just put 6, and then put 6 next to it, and then 5. If you just tapered them, six
6
next to it, and then 5 in the
6,
last
5,
one.
yeah.
That tapers it in over 3 years, and it still uses the ARPA money to get you where you wanted to go.
And still,
Which to me is a really important consideration.
oh,
personally.
yes. Yes.
And could be less. The other thing we also don't know is what happens with property values.
No, you don't know.
And
don't know.
which we never know in advance, you know. Your property values extensions are 6%? 4%. Or 4%,
It's 4, 4, and 5.
or 4 and 5.
3, 4, 5. But,
4, 4, and 5, okay.
yeah, that's right, yeah, the orange.
All right, any other questions, Commissioner Walker?
I want to make sure that I'm saying this correct again. This is current,
Oh,
right?
sorry, didn't see it.
Mike, help me out. It's current,
This is, scroll back down, Deidre, make sure the yellow is not populated. Yep, that's current.
current with what the ask is for public safety.
That's 12 firefighters, a new station, 13 LPD personnel in the first year, and then phasing in 6, 6, and 5.
6 and 5.
Again, you're going to vote on it every year, but
Yeah.
at least you can see what the impact is.
And that's days.
But
I'm sorry.
please understand too, this is, every year we get new requests. You just got to see some recently from folks that have needs, right? This doesn't assume any new requests over the next few years. It doesn't assume that you're going to have the pay study
Yeah,
comes
that-
back with anything extra, right? So just understand that if you are going to adopt something like this, you're really just praying that values are going to go higher than the 4%, 4%, and 5%.
But
Right.
but like you just said, we still will have the option of not, or moving forward with the 6, 6, and 5. You know, it may not be able to do it because of how as you mentioned, the economy may fall, and
We just don't know.
we don't know that stuff.
We just don't know.
These are unknowns.
One way or the other, we just don't.
There's what are the things we pretty well know?
Yeah.
We pretty well know we continue to grow as a city.
Right.
And so we have those pressures that are going to continue to be in place. We know that we are going to grow in terms of costs. Well, there's probably not a lot of abating. We'll see that taking place. We're going to look at a pay study, and we're going to see that we need to probably grow in wages. It's interesting, when I was reviewing notes, in fiscal year, employees that left the city of Lakeland, in fiscal year 21, that was 187. In fiscal year 22, that was 208. So we have an increasing rate of people looking to go other places. We have to have pay lines that help people want to work here. We don't know to all address those futures going forward, but those are realities that we're going to be looking at as we do go forward. And there's changes we're going to need to make. We want this to be an attractive place for people to work and live.
Yes.
What other questions, comments? Any other illustration changes you'd like to look at? Commissioner Reed?
There again, I'm always the voice of doom, it seems like, but,
You're not.
Mike, what would happen if we change that, our property increased value down on 23 and 24 and 25 to 3?
Well, we're not changing 23 because that's what the,
Well, okay.
He meant 24, 25.
you talking about 24 and 25?
Yes.
Change it.
And 20, and 26,
All right, to what?
3.
That is the voice of doom.
Well, it's very probable.
Yep. I think that's-
My encouragement in that regard, only as an optimist.
Well, obviously, Florida is growing, but there again,
Right.
we're gonna get new buildings, but there again, that doesn't mean everybody's property is gonna go up
Yes.
by 4%. And like I said, the tea leaves say different things for different people. And
sure.
I just wanted to get a perspective of what it looked like if it were
It's sobering.
3%. As is, 4 is probably a good number, but it could be 2.
It could be 8. Right, and 6, some other number higher.
Right.
Right. So the spectrum is good, and I'd probably be more optimistic on that number than we illustrate. It's a good cautioning for us, and your point is good. And we do have time to respond later in another year to millage.
Right.
The question, the problem that I have in that is twofold. A zoom out. I think about the reckless federal spending that we see, and it drives me crazy. So this is anything, and I'm sure it drives most people in this room crazy. This is anything but reckless, even at the 0.326, because it's really a responsible look. That's what's a probable outcome. We're looking at increases in pay that we believe we're going to have to accelerate with our employees. We need to hire. We're probably going to have to create some hiring incentives as we go along the way. We want safety. And so I love the fact that we're not playing with that red top left line, because I would be very, very reticent to see us do anything to cut that. On the other hand, we want to be prudent enough to know that with all that growth that we're increasing as a city, and the potential that we have to have additional needs to help sustain that we haven't put ourselves in a corner not to go forward. We've cut our property taxes twice as a commission since this group at large has been here. If we took the 0.326, and this is really important to me, that means the average appraised value home in this city, which is in the 123,000 range, isn't that right, is a $33 impact. So we're talking about property taxes of $3 a month, less than, that would be the impact of a 0.326 millage increase, but yet the ability to make sure that we positioned ourselves fiscally responsible enough to go forward. For $1 million home, let's just take that, it's a $300 increase, $330 something. So if you think about that, that's less money than, I mean, it's $12, I'm sorry, it's $30 a month for over the 12 months. That's the range that we're talking. The citizen impact, I think if you were going door to door and asking citizens, would you invest in that amount of surety to make certain we don't have to cut back on services, to preserve quality of life, to make sure that we're growing appropriately with our public safety measurements. I think there's very few people who you could relate that to cups of coffee in the course of a year. That we're not talking about some huge economic impact that puts a burden on our citizens at that level. And I want us to be cognizant enough of that to think about how do we position ourselves well to be responsible, not reckless at any level, but to be responsible when our millage rate currently is lower than Mulberry's. And to think about what can we do to posture ourselves to make certain that as we absorb this growth that we've made the right forward motion steps. And to me, that's the wonderful part about us talking about a small increment in every household that we're talking about. This is not egregious. This is not something that's alarming. This isn't something that we would go, can you believe we increased our taxes that much? This is absorbable by people. And yet it doesn't compromise our ability to function and attract the right kind of people and pay. Having the right employees in this city staff is hugely important. And we're going to have to be very, very aggressive in how we do that and take care of benefits. So my encouragement is to put it in perspective, because sometimes we can elevate things as if they're going to have this terrible impact. We've cut our taxes twice as a commission. This is a time to prep ourselves for what is a high inflation period going forward, a reduction of property values that we would expect to see, but still not compromising public safety and still supporting growth. And so that's my little dissertation on that. Commissioner McCarley.
I definitely want to make sure that we do our public safety. I totally, and I'm so glad that Commissioner McLeod, that you and Commissioner Reed just asked, and Commissioner Walker too, for some of these different scenarios. When I look out at the days cash on hand, if we're aiming for 45 to 60 days, this is still pretty doable, even into fiscal year 25, to not do a millage increase and to get what we need in public safety, because in 2025, you're at 54 days cash on hand. I know that makes everybody squirmy, but I mean, that's still within our margin of error. Now, the fiscal year 2026, but if we look at this annually, we can always mitigate that from year to year if we need to do an increase. I will say that it might sound like it's not a lot to property, owners and taxpayers that we're doing 30, whatever you just referenced, the $30 a year or $300 for $1 million homesteaded home. Right now, though, we're having to pass on fuel expenses to our constituency and outside the city limits that is excruciating, and that is just because the cost of fuel is up. There's no money being made on that. That's just a complete pass-through. So I think even though this one thing looked at, our millage rate looked at singularly to a household, looks small, we're adding it on top of groceries costing more money and power costing more money and cars costing more money and everything else. So when you have to, if we're representing the people, we need to look at it holistically, and that what can we do as a city with our general fund and make sure that we are providing the high quality of service that we all want, especially with regard to public safety, that I think we're all committed to. But we also need to, we might not have the luxury of looking out 3 years, 4 years in advance and playing the what if game. What if, with Commissioner Reed's point of looking at 3%, or even Mr. Brosart and I talked this morning in our one-on-one that, worst case, we're in the negative several years ago. So we do have to be cognizant of that, but we're coming off of 14.6, and I don't think any of us anticipated that 14.6, so we need to tighten our budget belts and, work off of that. I don't want to use the word windfall, but that high increase of property values, and make sure we're managing correctly and we're being good stewards. So that's, for me, is I appreciate looking at the no increase and still getting our public safety needs met, and then moving forward. And I want to hear from the rest of my fellow commissioners about what they think. But where I am is looking at it without an increase in millage, maintaining our public safety standards with these increases, because I think they're a necessity, and moving forward from there. And looking at it annually, these days, cash on hand for next year still being at 100, I'm comfortable with that.
Right. Okay. Other comments from commissioners?
Mr. Madden would like to speak.
Oh, Commissioner Madden, I didn't see
Thank
you.
you. I had a couple questions. So Mike, the first one's for you and the second one is for the chief. The first one is on page 22, when you talk about police being 52,231,243, and that's fiscal year 2023. That is projecting the increases that are in this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That assumes staffing at 13 additional. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that should be about $3 million more, because you said to get us 30 police officers over the next 4 years, it's about $3 million a year.
No, no, I think it was slightly over 120, 130 a year in the out years. So if we're doing 6, you're at 700,000. So it won't be 3 million per year added. So
This
you're-
millage increase of 0.33 that you have
yeah,
advised would cover, you said if you want to have something, you need to pay for it. So
Right.
that was the suggested rate at which we would pay
Yes,
for
ma'am.
those
So
30
the
officers.
3326 covers the 13, covers the 12, and it covers the debt service. We are burning down the 1466 in days cash, the increase in days cash. You're burning that down if you want to add 6 and 5 and the museum and those things in the out years that you had talked about. You're burning that down going in the out years, again, using the assumptions of 4, 4, and 5.
Okay.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
then on the same page, the chart above, the same question, in 2023 fiscal year, the property tax is including the increase in millage that was proposed to get to the 51 million?
Yes, ma'am. And not all, remember, not all 51 of that is the general fund. There's a $5.3 million of that is the CRAs.
So we get about $45 million in property taxes,
45, 46, yes, ma'am.
and we pay $52 million for our police.
Yes, ma'am.
So I just, when I became a commissioner, that was pretty shocking, that we don't, all of our property taxes that we pay in the city of Lakeland, the millage rate that we pay, doesn't even cover our police. And so when you think about the services that we get in the city of Lakeland with our Parks and Rec and with our fire and the quality of life that we have, it's all on a millage rate that doesn't even cover our police. So just to the mayor's point about, it's all contextually, no one likes any kind of a pay, tax hike. It's, it's a bad word to say, you're going to increase your taxes. But it is important to know, that we need to pay for what we think is important. And I'm glad that my colleagues are not taking the first responders out of the equation and trying to see if we can pay for that with our current millage rate. Certainly, the mayor reiterated that we've decreased our millage rate twice. Since I've been in office, we've never, raised our millage rate, only decreased it. But when I see that number, trying to find my page, about how many people, 7,600 people, have moved to Lakeland in the last 2 years. And we sit here every day and are approving multifamily projects and housing projects in Southwest Lakeland and out by Bridgewater, and that's not even taking into account the commercial growth. So when you think about the people in the cars and the traffic that a lot of our neighbors are complaining about, I mean, that's traffic tickets and accidents and, running red lights and it doesn't take a lot of rocket science to think 7,600 people in 2 years. So my question for the chief is, when you asked for these models to project the level of police coverage we need with our growth, are you anticipating 7,600 every 2 years, since we're the second fastest growing metropolitan area in the country?
In our per capita study, we did take into account that was the pace that we had seen growth at. So at each year, we've calculated for each year of that.
So we're in an unprecedented period of growth in the city of Lakeland. So it does seem like 0 to 30. I had people say, I feel duped. I mean, we were talking about body cameras and then all of a sudden we had 0 requests to we have 30 requests? What in the world's happening? I don't feel like we're unsafe. We didn't have big riots in the COVID period. So how in the world did we just, make that big leap? It was interesting to see your reports about COVID actually cut crime.
Yes.
But I was curious when Commissioner Walker said we could go into recession. Do you have statistics on does recession also cut crime?
No, ma'am, that is not what we normally see. A bad economy usually spikes crime.
So whether we have a recession or not
You got to have protection.
is not going to, if we are making projections and we don't do the police coverage that we need at the pace of growth that we're seeing, we can't say that, well, it's a recession, so we can't, increase our police and then think that crime's going to just listen to us and take a vacation.
No, ma'am, we would anticipate hard times would create more crime.
And I would also say that I feel like I hang around a lot of fiscally conservative people who don't like taxes, ever.
And you are one.
And the T word, yes. But if they're going to raise taxes for anything,
Public safety.
they want to make sure we are funding our police.
Yes, ma'am.
And that it's the highest priority. And that I can't go to the Kelly Rec Center or walk around Lake Hollingsworth or, go to the parks if I don't feel safe in my city. And we had Harry's have a fire. And I'm thinking about the commercial, $1 million commercial small business. As a small business owner, and it's, millage rate, $1 million commercial property, let's say you have, that means I'm going to be paying about $300 something extra a year to make sure that if I have that fire, and that, we don't have rioting or, too many problems in our downtown so that we can operate safely as small business owners. So I think it's, very compelling, and I've been really taking this seriously since our strategic planning budget. And I know that Commissioner Reed thinks we disagree. Listen, I don't like taxes either. I've been right there with you voting for the decrease, 2 out of the last several years. But I feel the growth. I see it, and I feel like people have been pro-development and excited about growth, and almost every one of our commission meetings, they're like, wait a second, not in my backyard. I don't want that new, multifamily. I don't want to have, more people on my streets. I'm starting to feel the congestion. On the neighborhood, you follow the neighborhood meetings and you hear everyone's cameras are picking up people on their front porches and taking their packages and breaking into cars. And, I hate to say it, but, we had one of our former commissioners killed in her own home on Lake Morton. That is not the city that we want to live in. And so I'm listening to see how we can maybe cover this at the same millage rate. We have 7, it's a super majority, just even keep our current millage rate. So I don't know. I feel like we have a very conservative commission. I don't know what the appetite is of my colleagues, but I've been really up at night, since the strategic planning thinking. It did seem like an ask that was like, what in the world? How did we go from 0 to 30? And I was hopeful that we could make more cuts at the RP Funding Center. I was just thinking if we could cut that subsidy and then put that towards police and fire. I know we've got a new strategy in the spring to try to make a dent in that subsidy. I think it's hard for people to swallow when they think that money's, maybe going down the drain over here, and when we really need it, as our priority for our public safety. But we've been asking the tough questions, and we've been trying to get the RFP for the management just to do what we know to do to try to cut costs. And we didn't give raises and pay during COVID. I don't feel like we've been crazy, just spending money. But I am worried if we try to just see how this goes without the increase that's, been proposed, that we can really do it. And I don't know I don't know who's going to be right on the 3% or if it's going to be a windfall again next year. It's really hard to predict, and I know we're 1 year at a time, but I just think, like you said, Chief, you didn't know we were going to have 7,600 people moving in 2 years. We never had that happen before.
No, and that rate will go up, not down.
So it's like, if you've never had that happen before, how could you project that that's gonna happen? But now it would be like shame on us if we don't think it's gonna happen when we've been in the news as a fastest growing metropolitan area. And the word spread, you know? I don't know, does a recession mean people won't move here? So I'm just, you know, kind of, I've been reticent to say anything tonight because I was doubtful we could get a supermajority for any kind of a millage increase, just knowing the appetite of this commission is very fiscally conservative and, you know, really wanted to see, you know, kind of maybe some more budget cuts before we ever ask the taxpayers for any extra dollars. And at the same time, I think, gosh, you know, we really are spoiled and blessed that we live on the millage rate that we live on and have all the fantastic services that we have in the city of Lakeland.
Yes, City Manager Terrell.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, because Commissioner Madden made a comment there that made me think of something, and I should have clarified this earlier in the comments about the population. The population number we provided is for the city of Lakeland. Now, that applies to PD, who only covers the city of Lakeland. But many of our services, as you know, our water utility, our electric utility, extend outside of the city limits of Lakeland. So really, the population growth is greater in terms of the whole budget because of the growth out in those areas. I only provided the growth specific to the city.
And there's people that come from out of the city into the city that LPD has to cover as well, and that have impact and work here. And that's all wonderful. That's part of growth. I do think we have made some progress on, just to give a few props on RP, in terms of the budget that they're going. And so, and it is the fiscal responsibility of this commission to drive that forward that matters to make that happen. But we're going to have this growth. It would be like in our own homes, deciding we're going to hire a few more people to help around the house, but not having any way to figure out how to pay for them, when we know we have impending pressures anyway of inflation. We have impending pressures in terms of uncertainties we don't know that we have in terms of even the overtime that we might be able to work, and all those things that take place. And we know we have to keep a quality of workforce in place to keep the kinds of amenities we have in this city in place that everybody expects. We don't like it when Parks and Recs cut services back, you know, and when we don't fund it well enough, then we have to talk about what don't we do. And when we have a police training, fire training takes years to bring up to speed. It isn't something that happens just because you decide to hire people. It takes all that integration of people working together, knowing how they're working well, the ones that don't pan out, all of that. And so for us to do this responsibly, for something that is absorbable, we're not talking about something that is not absorbable by the public, that if we had serious problems, people go, charge me, I'd be happy to do that. To protect public service, I just think we should think about the fact we have cut twice. This is the time for us to have a supermajority and to put the .326 in place so that we have propped ourselves up well next year for continuing growth. And we have the ability to not do anything more, or maybe even to cut back next year if that took place. But being responsible, when I budget, I'm going to budget for what I know I can anticipate as an increase, as long as it's reasonable and it's attainable. So my encouragement is that we think about the real net impact to each citizen of this and the reasonableness of it, and the fact that if we were doing a poll going down the street and gaining what we're talking about, making sure we're solid so we don't have to cut back something in some other area, that people would say, sure, I can cut back on something, I'd be happy to pay that. Because I think they would. And we don't want to make this act seem like it is a greater increase than it is. Commissioner Madden.
Well, I will just say, you know, it's one of the most frustrating things I think we face is when you think about the speed of government, when we're trying to, you know, bolster our infrastructure, whether it's our water infrastructure for developer that wants to develop out by, you know, Kathleen Road, or, you know, you've got traffic, and, you know, if you don't think ahead, it's hard to now then, you know, retrofit and to scramble to try to mitigate traffic and build roads, you know, after the fact. And so if we could get ahead of it and, you know, do this now, I don't know. I mean, that would kind of be my leaning.
Commissioner Music.
Thank you. You know, I'm trying to balance and think about the difference between, you know, being fiscally conservative and fiscally responsible. You know, at the same time. And Chief, I really appreciate you bringing all of this information, because I had a serious bone to pick with you prior to this. Right? I mean, I remember us sitting up here and talking about body cameras, and I was very specific. Do you have the bodies that you need? Yep, we're fully staffed, and then I get that increase, you know, that request, and I was like, you know, to go from that number was very difficult for me, where, you know, other departments can show run times and show things that was easier for me to digest. And just the other day, I was rear-ended in a automated car wash, of all things. I stopped, they did not. And she just gassed her way through and hit my wife and I. Well, anyway, so we you know, it was their responsibility. They called the police because it was private property, and we waited for 45 minutes. Now, I wasn't concerned at all about that 45 minutes, because I knew they said there was no injury, and my wife and I just sat back and talked with you know, and we had you know, the officer came, everything was great, but for some people, that's a big deal, right? I was hanging out with my wife, no big deal. But we're not really talking about those issues, right? We're talking about the other things. We're talking about the serious issues of, you know, that are not somebody rear-ending into you. So, you know, I tend to have a difficult time looking and saying I want more, and I don't want to pay anything for it. Because I do think that we're absolutely right. I mean, I had a text conversation back and forth with somebody that's somewhere far right of right, and you know, and we were going back and forth, and I just asked him the simple question: is would you pay X number of dollars for more service? You know, and didn't really want to, you know, answer the question, but got around to it, and they did. And that's the thing. If we could sit here and have everybody come through this one at a time and check, I think overwhelmingly they would say, yeah, I'll pay for it. The problem is, though, Mayor, is that we're asking them to pay more for this, more for that. They're running the pump. Everybody, we can't isolate. This isn't in a vacuum. I think with Mike, I did mine, and mine might be, you know, an extra, you know, $200 or something. That's okay. I'm willing to do that, because I see we have great service, but I cannot assume that everybody can do that, especially when, you know, everything is more. So where I'm trying to look and balance is can we meet the needs of the citizens with the people that we know have our back, right? I mean, somebody comes in this door, we have been in our training to go down, they don't do that. Their job is to turn around, right? And to address that coming through. And I, you know, I love that, admire that, and appreciate that, and that is why my wife and I still live here, and my 3 kids will come back and this is great. But how do we get there? How do we come up with that and run into Publix and run into the parks and see people, and they say every time you get a chance you're raising taxes? This is a tough seat, and it's a tough seat because we are asking people to spend money, and some of them do not see a value in it, because it's blanket, it's across the board. They're going to pay for it because the millage rate goes up, whether they ever utilize the police, whether they ever utilize fire. And that's, you know, and that's difficult for me. So I would like to see how we can get as close to staying where we're at and still be fiscally responsible with paying what we have to pay. You know, and we look and we can compare ourselves and say, well, you know, we're still paying lower than certain towns around. But ultimately, you know, my position on that, most people, I don't live there, so I don't really care. What I care about is where I live, what are my services, what are my, you know, what am I getting for the dollar? And I'll be honest with you, you know, Stephanie, when you had said that, I didn't even do that math. You know, what we get for what we pay is phenomenal, and I think that we have. You know, the fiduciaries and the people that are working on that side are great, but we still have to push against as often as we can and say, we can't just, and this was my conversation, is I'm tired of it always asking for more, right? Whether it's more people, whether it's more salary. Not that I'm saying we don't need it, but it's like every time we turn around, we're being asked to increase and up something, and that's very frustrating for me because again, we get asked these questions all the time and we get confronted with that because that's the position that we have chosen to serve. So I say all that to say that I want to make sure that I'm fiscally responsible with the dollars that have come in, and I think having the service provided is key. I just want to see how we can get there with the tightest squeeze that we can, and I don't know that I have that answer. That's why I'm enjoying, and I love my friend down there, but I don't play the ne'er-do-well side well. I really am optimistic, and I want to look at that and say, okay, the fortunate thing for us is that we get to look at this every single year. The downside is, though, that fiscal year 2026 still scares me to death when I look at it, even though we're just guessing. But it still scares me because we're talking about our city. We're talking about our community, and I need to know that the people behind this, that they're not stressing out because they've got 28 days of cash. You know, and I know those are assumptions because we're a long way from 26. You know.
Yes, sir.
So I want to squeeze every penny we can. So let's do everything we can to squeeze the absolute thing that we can out of this.
Which I think is why we cut taxes twice.
I agree.
You know.
Yeah.
And we've done that.
And we do. We have a very good millage rate, right? And when we compare, like we do with salary, you know, we look around and we compare, and that is great. But remember, comparison still doesn't write the check.
Right.
We write the check individually.
And I tell you, I just get so concerned about making sure our employees are taken care of going forward. And that should be haunting, I think, for all of us because of the fact that we know the kind of pressure we're going to have on this going forward based on the cities around us and the increases that they're putting in place. And our people can work someplace else. Now, they walk away from a lot, and it's a great city, but we want to have people that like their jobs here and want to stay here, you know. And it's not going to be less. It's not going to be the same. It's something that we're going to have to address. Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. There again, I think there again, because I seem to be conservative, everybody thinks I'm not going to vote for this. And there again, when I came here this evening, I plan on voting for it. So let everybody know that right off the bat. And of course, the only reason I'm going to vote for it is because I think public service and the fire department and the police department are critical. When I call that number, I want them to be there. If somebody's beating on your door, coming in the window, you've got to probably take care of yourself pretty quick. But they can assist you if you've got a good lock. And of course, when your firehouse is catching on fire, you've got minutes to get out. Hopefully they'll get there in time to put it out where not all your personal treasures are destroyed. And of course, like you say, it's my insurance is going up a lot more than my property taxes.
Wow.
And I have no control over that. And they don't do anything for me. And they want to take off liability off your policy and keep the same thing. But that's another horse to beat. And of course, I like I'll probably get crucified. I'm usually the no guy on the real estate taxes. But I am going to be the yes guy tonight. I was ahead of you though, but anyway. But that's basically, I guess I'm done it. And we talk about people who don't have the $200 to pay for their taxes. We got people who haven't got $200 in their checkbook. And of course, with everything else going up, and again, rent's going up, everything's going up, and fortunately, I've got a little bit of money in the bank, so I can cover it this week, maybe not next month, but who knows? But that's what I just said my piece.
Commissioner McLeod, thank you, sir.
Thank you. And Mayor and others, there are good arguments, like many of the issues that we face. There are good arguments on both sides that you can see why you have the position that you're taking tonight. I think one of my the biggest reasons that being hesitant to approve an increase is because we're still receiving a sizable bump in property tax revenue, even at the current rate. And so on top of that, layering a millage rate increase, however small, I don't see that as a lever we have to pull right now. And we can still fund the public safety requests that are before us. And if we can do that for a number of years at least, then I stay in support of the rate where it is at the 5.4. So that's why I just keep coming back to that it's already an increase, even at the same rate that it is this year.
Got it. Commissioner Walker.
I'm making sure I did hear my colleague, and I would tend to agree with what he mentioned, but I want to make sure that what I'm looking at as well is where he mentioned and where I am at this point. We're keeping the request for public safety in the actual equation. We're certainly seeing what is presented here at 5.43, whatever, 5.43. That is it right there, right?
Yeah. Hey, Dee, slide back down to make sure the yellow box is empty. Yep, thank you.
So we still have,
That's
going,
5.4323, so don't focus on the
Yeah, I know.
text in C2.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, I
not
know
relevant.
that, I know that.
So that shows you 5.4323.
And with
That's
the-
correct.
With, of course, property values looking at a conservative number, 4% for the next couple of years, and 5% third year, whatever. I mean, well, you have as you have it there. So that's where I would stand.
Well, and my response to that would be the windfall piece of this, which is the 14%, equips us to be able to make this big move.
Sure.
You know, and that's an important timing piece for us, because it's a moment to be seized when we know the predictability of property values won't be there.
Right.
They're falling. And I saw a hand, I'm sorry. Commissioner Music.
Would you mind taking the fiscal year 24 and 25 on, what is that, cell 18 or C18, and just making it go up to, let's look at like a 765? So, when you and I are talking all the time, and I'm really focused on today's cash on hand.
Yes.
But in the same respect, I listened to, Commissioner McLeod. I'm like, listen, we haven't increased just because of the values have increased, right? So there's more money coming in just because of the value of what people have had. From the seat that you sit in, what don't you like about that? What makes you nervous?
The 7 makes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, what sitting here today, what makes you look at?
The 7 does not make me as nervous as the 6 and the 5. I don't pretend to be able to tell the future.
And I'm not asking that.
But I will tell you this: one of the indices that I look at is treasuries. But I'm looking at 3-month versus the 10-year, 6-month, the 12-month, the 2-year, the 5 on down. And I looked before this meeting, and every one of those except the 3-month is higher than the 10-year. Okay, if that continues, history says 12 to 18 months later you end up with a recession. That's just history. That's not a prediction of the future, but that's history. So if that, along with some of the other things we see, we know that the Fed is putting their thumb on the scale because they feel that's going to be driving the recession. It is. It's going to drive a very slowed economy that somebody's going to call a recession because GDP fell 2 quarters in a row, right? Will that have a direct impact on the value of properties in this city? I can't predict that. I don't know what that is. But I remember when property values did go down, and it wasn't 4% and 3%, it was negative. Okay? And we've got some protections in place in the state level now to keep it from being quite as bad. But if it's 0 for any period of time, if you take on $4 million worth of debt, recurring debt, okay, not the ARPA piece, recurring debt, we can't find that. There's no golden goose for that one, okay? What happens in 26 is you're raising the millage by a lot. And if the market has driven it to the point where we see that, that's going to be the worst time in the world to ask a citizen to go up not 0.3326, but probably a mil, right? just to fund what we've added in recurring costs, necessary recurring costs. So again, not a prediction, just facts for you to digest as you go through this.
Commissioner Music.
So a follow-up on that. So I mean, my gut then would be to say that to hold it for 23 with the consideration of maybe we go up in 24 if we need to. I mean, I'd rather get, what's that?
I would say all 25.
Well, yeah, because I'd rather get kicked in the gut once than twice.
Yeah.
I mean, it may be a little more in fiscal year 24 if we have to, but again, we just don't know, right? We don't know, and the last thing that we want to do is wait and let it sit to 26, where we've got to go up a mill because of that. But we do have 2 years in the interim to be able to go up fractionally more.
Other comments?
Time to vote.
None? Public comments? No.
Yes, this is a public hearing. The ordinance under consideration is a millage rate of 5.7649. So it is, would be appropriate to call for public comment at this time.
Mr. Mayor, to the center podium.
To the center podium, if somebody has a public comment, and I just, for brevity purposes, since this body is not talking about reducing any services, it doesn't need to be for support of services, because that's all being held in this.
Right.
So it's really the rate at which we're talking. So if anybody has a comment, you can have a comment on what I just said if you want to. But if you have a comment, maybe you might want to make it with respect to the millage levels.
3 minutes, 5 minutes? What?
And 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Yeah, which, yeah, take that down. There we go. That fixes that. So does anybody have, on the public side, have a comment? Just come right up to that center mic right here, please, and state your name, please. That's right. We're all jealous.
Yeah.
See, you get to stand up.
Good evening. You're all doing a good job. I just got done doing my budget for next year, so I know where you're at.
Can you state your name, please, ma'am?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I just want to talk about the budget first. No. My name is Gloria Hodgson. I am president of Foxwood Lake Estates Property Owners Association. You may recall we was here in January to ask for a new fire station in North Lakeland, as you was discussing. We followed that up with a petition of 582 names just in our park alone. We are here tonight to see if our request is going to happen for a new fire station in North Lakeland. As you know, as you're all aware, North Lakeland has grown so much in the last year, 2 years. In fact, as I speak now, there's even a new business being built on 98. Don't know what it's going to be, but there's a new one going up. The closest fire station, as I stated before, is too far away. So I'm glad you were considering it. Now, to push it a little bit further, do you have any idea? I know you're voting on it. I know you're talking about budget, money, increase, all of that. Do you have a plan for that? Is there a plan in place for a new fire station? Can you tell me if it's on the board? Can you tell me you have land you're negotiating on? Can you tell me, yes, in 2 years or 3 years? Can anybody answer that question for
Would
me?
you like to make a comment on that, sir?
So you asked a lot of questions there, and I'm old, so you might have to repeat some of those for me.
All right. Are you negotiating on land? First, let's start that.
We,
North Lakeland.
Yes and no. We've identified several properties that we were looking at, and we're trying to be strategic about that because, you know, obviously if you say I'm interested in that property, the price starts going up, right? So
Correct.
we're trying to be smart and strategic about that. We're looking at some different locations, trying to see what our options are. There is an area that we want to stay in because if we get too far away from that, we're not going to have the response times that we need. We're not going to have the access to Highway 98, which is our main thoroughfare, and we need that signaled intersection to go both directions. So we do have an area. We do have some locations that we're looking at, and we got some work, you know, on the city side to see what kind of development's going on and what we might be able to do there. But I wish I could tell you we have this property and it's going to be right here, but we're not there yet.
Okay, so at this point, you have no idea when this is going to happen?
No, ma'am.
No, okay. But can you tell me, is it going to happen?
Well, that's what we're voting on.
We're working on, all right.
I wish I could answer that.
And I understand that. But number one, the fire department and the police department, as you've all said, is very important. Our lives are important to us. Our homes are important to us. When you get up to our age, all right, it's going to be a hard time. You want the fire department there now to help you get out of the burning house. So anyway, and as far as the increase, like I said, I've been working on a budget, so I know where you're at. I know about increases and how you're concerned, don't like that, the citizens. But if that means that we are going to be safe, that the police department is going to have the time response. And one comment, that young man on the police department, he is correct. If you correct it the first time, you don't have to go back 2 or 3 times later. So that's why one reason we need a a police department. And the fire department's the same. So please consider it. And here it goes. They're going to hate me back here. But if you have to go up on taxes to make this happen, you'd be better doing it now before next year it increases more and more and more. So please consider it. Make it top priority for our safety in Lakeland. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see if they clap. Okay, you're safe to go home. Any other comments at all? Okay, this is a roll call vote.
Can I ask a procedural question first?
Certainly.
So because we have a follow-up meeting where we're actually ratifying that, voting it in,
Binding.
what if I say yes or no on something, what am I saying and how does that reflect on the future of 3
Sure,
weeks from now?
whatever millage rate you adopt tonight becomes the maximum
The
that you
max.
can adopt. You cannot exceed that 2 weeks from tonight.
Okay.
But on the other hand, if you vote for 5.7649, that doesn't prevent you from going below that 2 weeks from now.
So currently, what we have to vote yay or nay on is the 5.74.
Yes, correct.
And that by voting, if that passes, that is our ceiling. And over the next couple weeks, we have the ability to go down, but we do not have the ability to go up.
That's
Correct.
Thank you.
All right. Any other procedural questions? Commissioner Walker?
No.
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 Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Okay, so it fails. And so now the next question we can consider is, would you pick a rate in
Yes.
between? If we were restoring just what we've cut, that'd be 0.1321. Okay? Just what we have done historically as a commission, or some other number. My question to you is, would you consider something in between?
Something in between the current 5.4323 and this amount here.
And if so, would you make a motion to that effect?
Okay, I want to make sure, if I may ask a question?
Yes, absolutely,
From a
Commissioner Walker.
procedural, but if we want to stay where we see the scenario is now and move forward with that, okay, and if we make that motion, and if it passes, that means we cannot go above this.
We could not go above the one we passed, whatever that number is.
Whatever that is.
Make a motion for the
Yeah, so-
5.43 and we'll see where it lands.
Yes, that's my motion, make the motion 5.3, with all the things that we have here, 5.4323. It's my
So the
motion.
current millage.
The current
Knowledge
motion,
that we have.
yes, all those
And
things,
there's a second for that.
The
Okay,
motion
just
was for the current millage?
yes,
5.4323.
Which will still require the supermajority.
right.
And
Okay.
the second was,
Chad, I'm sorry,
Chad.
Commissioner
Commissioner
McLeod.
McLeod.
sorry, I'm just trying to keep up.
That's fine, I'm sorry. It was the first time we had any action, so we appreciate you being there. Commissioner Madden?
Thank you. So I wonder, I know that you cannot raise it if you go to the lower one tonight. Is there a way to have a caveat that this would absolutely include the 12 firefighters and the new station and the 13 LPD personnel? I mean,
That wouldn't be binding on you 2 weeks from
No,
tonight.
No.
yeah,
Wouldn't be binding.
Yeah, it wouldn't be binding, but.
Okay, well, the motion is, that we're discussing is that rate. And if you had a desire to have it be something higher and in between, you could do that too. So you could vote this no if you wanted it to be something a little higher, or you could, or we could have a supermajority that approves the
What we do,
5.43.
Mr.
Yes,
Mayor.
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Reed.
Again, I would like to make it, I think it would be somewhere in between. Of course, again, if this passes, on the next budget hearing, you're gonna see me cry out about some of our giveaways programs that I'm gonna vote against. I think we're gonna have to really cut our, people who want to have a lot of ask. You're gonna get no on every one of them from me.
Okay. Got it. Duly noted. Let's try and have one conversation. So if you just raise your hand, I'll call on you. Okay?
But
Commissioner
again,
Walker.
again, I want to make sure that my motion included, well, we know we're voting on the actual rate itself, the ad valorem rate, but if I heard correct, based on what we have voted on, and what was presented to us, all those things that we talked about are in that particular equation or not?
That's the next motion, right? This is just the millage.
I know
Right,
this is
but
not-
it will establish what the next motion, the next
The
ordinance could
next
be.
motion will then be the budget.
Okay, got
So,
you, yeah.
but
But
yes,
yeah,
in terms
yes,
of what we're
yes,
looking
yes,
at.
yeah,
So
we
that's
include
your-
that. Yes, yeah, all right. Just make sure I was thinking right.
Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. And to Commissioner Madden's question about would there be a caveat to those public safety personnel, and while that's not binding, my sense is that we all support funding
What's there?
those as presented.
Yes,
So it's
the illustration before.
theory that
Yes.
could change, but I don't, my sense from the group is we're committed to that, to
Yes.
those positions, and just wanted to make that clear.
If we just restored, and this is just to think about as you go forward, if we went anything above this, just to try and create some buffer, so if we voted this down, if we didn't have 5, and we went back to our 5.5644 that we had before we did our two cuts,
2018.
that adds back a 0.1321 as an increase. That's also something we might want to consider in a third motion if this one fails. I'm just throwing that out. So if you were thinking about something that bridged a little bit in between, that's something to think about as well. Any other comments, Commissioner?
Can we have Mike put in a 5.5644?
She just put it in,
That's it right there.
See how fast she is? There you go.
but she needs to go back to the property values to 4%.
Oh yeah, take your property values
Yeah,
back.
property values need to be back at
They need to be
4,
back at 4.
Go back to 4.
No, 445.
Let's take it up to 10.
4.45.
We can sure mess up in Excel.
445, yeah.
Okay.
There you go, 445.
There you go.
Do you want the officers in or not?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, keep
So
that
that's,
going.
that's what you're looking at right there.
Right.
Dee, what'd you put in the yellow? Is it 1321? All right. Thank you.
So that's an interim, just to think about as you're thinking about this vote. And you're still at 66 days and 25. So, all right. Any other discussion? Commissioner Madden?
I would be curious, because this vote's before the next vote, so I feel like some, maybe of my colleagues would be looking at a math equation and making sure we're paying for what we're asking. I feel like for others, it might be more of a philosophical, like they just wouldn't want to increase taxes, and so it really wouldn't be a negotiation of a math equation. So I feel like it's kind of interesting to make this vote before we would
Yes.
think that there might be another vote, like for me, who would actually is looking at the math equation and wanting to pay for what we're asking for,
Right. Okay.
instead of just philosophically being against raising taxes.
Any other comments by Commissioners?
So are you saying that the math doesn't add up to you?
I'm just saying if we were really going to talk about math, because you got to get 5 people. So, but I don't know if we are. I would be reticent to think we could get 5.
Well, I'm
That would
talking
want to
about
do the
your,
math equation, that there would probably not be 5.
so you're talking about the math on the votes, not the math on is this going to cover the police and fire?
Both.
Yeah, perhaps, and tell me if I'm wrong, the sentiment is there enough desire to change it above the current millage rate.
Speaking for myself, I could certainly be twisted to reach what you said, especially in this first vote, right? I could certainly see that, but to echo Commissioner McLeod, I mean, my taste at this point is 100% to include the service, and if that doesn't work, then I would be with Commissioner Reed and say, okay, what else do we have to work on and scrape off to be able to make that? So that is my priority.
Well, and I've been there before, and so it will be, what can we scrape?
Because you're saying the math isn't adding up to you.
Well, I'm just saying typically that's where we find ourselves, is that we are then we're talking about cutting services. I mean, in my 5 years of experience, if you want to add things, you can't just keep adding and adding without cutting things.
Well,
And 30 officers and a fire station and 12 firefighters, I mean, that's a lot.
So you're saying that math was
I mean,
not
we might have had a
included.
one-year windfall, but one-year windfall.
That's-
it is
yeah.
included. That's-
It is included right now.
Yeah,
Everything except the capital is included
Right.
in those numbers right there.
yeah, it's all included.
Okay, so
Caution.
I know we can't promise, and I would like a promise that we're keeping all of our first responders in this, and I guess I can't have
can't.
that. And so,
But there seems to be a spirit of it.
a spirit, I mean, I'm putting on a spirit of it. I want to.
Let's vote and show it, not a spirit. Okay.
So I'm gonna vote, but then I could go either way, and I don't want to preempt this vote
Okay.
because I don't believe there's a spirit to keep everyone. Because we have to have 5 either way. So I wanna work with my colleagues to do what we think can get a vote done tonight, get 5.
Sure.
But I also want to, I really want to see
One with the other.
this happen, so.
Commissioner McCarley.
So I don't have when you ask if it's philosophical or if it's math, I don't have a burning philosophical issue about not raising taxes.
And some people do.
Some people do, and that's all the better, for them. But for me, I affirm that I want all of that public safety in there. I think we can do that budgetarily without, putting more constraint on our citizens right now. I think we can do it internally within the budget that we have. Now, is it going to be hard? Yeah, absolutely. It's probably going to be hard to negotiate and figure out how the team, and that's why we have brilliant people that work at the city of Lakeland to figure out how to make that work when we set the policy that says we want all of those public safety people and stations in place to take care of our citizens. And as someone who's called 911 and had a death in the family of a 36-year-old husband, and they were at my home very quickly to help me mitigate that, I absolutely will die on the hill of public safety, left, right, and center every time and twice on Sunday, just like I feel like most of us will. So I really want to make it clear, though, that me looking at this number is not about it being, against taxes and against, paying for things that we want. I absolutely want to do that. I also understand that our millage rate stays somewhat low because of our commercial investment in the city of Lakeland. So the commercial investments that we have, like your business and Publix and Amazon and all these different places, contribute to this bottom line for us, whereas in a Mulberry, that's not necessarily the case, or a Lake Hamilton, that's not necessarily the case. They don't have the commercial assets that we do that pay into our coffers. So for me, I want to look at this. I could be similar to Mr. Music, go to a point that's higher than our current millage to continue to have the discussion. But I want to know that we have strategically used the resources that our citizens have provided under the current millage to make sure we can continue to do well, and that we can continue to provide a high quality of service. And if that means we have to make
Cut
some
the
other
arts,
cuts,
like we will.
Well, I've died on the hill of the arts. I was involved, I sit on the arts committee. I want to have that money into the arts. And I think that if you look at overall at our budget, the arts contributes, just like when we're talking about the silver tsunami and the people leaving the city of Lakeland, from 200 vacancies down to 100, whatever you said earlier, about people leaving employment. It's not necessarily just about cost. Right. It's about some people are retiring. And that's why internship programs that we've programmed in strategic planning are very critical, because then we can galvanize and use the youth to come into public service when no one else is really wanting to serve publicly anymore into the framework of a municipality or a county. So I think that we have things in place that are going to help us with some of those avenues of losing good employees and longtime public servants where we're cultivating newer ones, and we're strategically thinking about that, and that's kudos to staff for doing that. But I felt compelled to say that this is, for me, is not a philosophical issue. This is more of a math issue, and that looking at what we have, that we have 14.66 coming in right now, that's huge.
Yes.
For 1 year.
And if we can't, for 1 year, right, and it's not guaranteed that it won't be here in subsequent years, but if we can't build a budget based on that, I mean, then we have other issues that we have to face, because that's a lot of money. So that's just the way I'm looking at it.
Commissioner.
And so my last caveat is, but it will come down to the two of us will be voting for arts, and that'll be it. We won't get it, so it'll be fine. I mean, that it does boil down to like what Mike Brossart is saying. This is like 3 years out, saying we would not ask for a cultural center, we would not ask for clay courts, we would not ask for anything. You know what I mean? So, that's what we're also projecting in these two, and that's why my colleague Commissioner Reed makes a very poignant point that he's voting for this. But if he doesn't get the increase to pay for this, he knows, because he's been on this commission a long time, that every year there's asks, whether it's for a homelessness initiative or whatever. So to pretend that there would not be any so that we can cover ourselves is a little bit unrealistic, is all I'm saying. So I think, like, if you really are thinking, if I'm asking for this, am I paying for it? Then that's a different question than, do I philosophically want to at all costs make sure we have the lowest property taxes that we can possibly have? And if that's your goal, that's a different goal. And I think it's a great goal. It can be, I'm just,
But your services are going to be.
yeah, I'm just being realistic about what we could achieve tonight, getting a 5-person vote. And so I'm trying to weigh what I'm going to do on this vote based on predicting the future at the next meeting and subsequent years of budget hearings.
We'll get to a 5 vote here. All right, Commissioner Music.
Yep. Mike, would you mind explaining to me, when we're looking at fiscal year 26, what is, and I've asked you this before and I apologize, I have forgotten, what is the big reason for such a huge percentage drop between those 2 years? I mean, why do we see us going from 66 to 39 days in cash on hand?
Because what we're seeing, and this is in any industry that has primarily service related.
Okay.
Our revenues do not grow nearly as fast as the cost of personnel.
Okay.
Right? And those things that come along with personnel, insurances and workers' comp, whatever it is, that just traditionally we don't see that keep up, right?
So our service increase fees are not as great a percentage as the increase in our labor and expenses.
That's correct. And for most general fund fees, you don't charge all of what you would if you were running your own business. For example, we're not going to teach people to swim and charge them what it costs us to run Kelly Rack or something like that. Or you're not going to get people to learn how to swim, right? That's
It has to be.
part of being in the government, right? You've got to subsidize some of those types of things, right? Just some of those types of things. So, but that's traditionally over the years, that's what you see is the expenses for personnel outweigh the types of growth that we have for property values, dividends, utility taxes, because we see downward pressure at the state level for communications tax, increases, those types of things. They're levelizing as well. So it all plays into it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Not to belabor this, but I do think it's important for our residents, the public, to hear our thought process as we work through this.
It's our only time to talk about it.
Commissioner McCarley mentioned this in her comments earlier, but the increases we've had on the Lakeland Electric side play into this for me, and I know for others as well, and those have been unavoidable. And we're potentially looking at a base rate increase in October. So the timing of this, when we have go back to a significant bump in property tax revenues just with the current rate, that's where it makes it impossible for me to vote for any millage rate increase right now. As I come back to that, and maybe in a different context or backdrop of conditions, but we're continuing to ask people to pay more, and we're saying we can't control fuel costs. That's true. This one's a harder sell to turn around and say, but we can control this, and we're in strong shape for the next few years at least, and we will stay nimble and flexible and continue to reevaluate. So I think that's an important point that I don't want to get lost in the discussion.
Good point. Cool. I appreciate it. Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. Of course, again, my point, not, and you made a very good point. Now, obviously, everybody's feeling the pinch. Because I want everybody to know that I want the policemen, I want the firemen, and I want our employees to get the raises they deserve.
Exactly.
I want Lakeland first. I don't really care about the people that come into Lakeland tomorrow. I do, but I want to take care of the people that are right here. And that's what's important to me. That's why I think we need a little bit more. I'm gonna probably vote against the 5.43. I would vote for the 5.56. But invariably, I just want everybody to know this is where I stand. And I'm not, the homelessness, the affordable housing, the arts are gonna take a back seat to these folks.
Okay. Commissioner Walker.
Well, I said I wasn't gonna say anything, but I got something to say. I've been through this 13 years, it's like, and I want to make sure that we understand, not that you don't, that whatever we decide, the staff is gonna do what needs to be done to make sure we get the things we ask for. And what we ask for is in this. Let's not lose sight of that. You know, it was explained by our city manager. He shared all that before we got to this point where we had this discussion the last hour, whatever it may have been. All of those things are already in part of this, in that illustration. So yes, we have the police and the fire and the ask of the other things that we have. That's all there.
Yes, sir.
It's all there. And I don't want us to use sight thinking, well, when we lose anything, you're not gonna lose anything because it's already there. It could be lost as years come along. You have a certain situation that comes about that causes to have a hiccup, but it's there right now.
And the most sobering part of that illustration is the 14.66.
Yeah.
Because that won't be there.
No, it won't be there, but tell you, you don't know what will be there. All right, time to vote.
Let's vote.
All right. I can't, yeah. And this is also requires public comment?
No, we've already heard the public comment at this point.
Good, great.
And so this is to adopt the current millage rate of 5.4323, and this will require a supermajority vote as well.
Okay, Commissioner McLeod?
Aye.
No,
Aye.
No.
Aye.
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 So that is,
5-2, that's a supermajority. So Mike, under state law, I have to announce what percentage above the rollback rate
Yeah.
that is, if you could.
You got to speak into the mic.
Okay, so the tentative millage rate that's been adopted tonight is 9.01% greater than the rollback rate. So the next order of business is to adopt the tentative budget ordinance, that is proposed ordinance number 22-041, an ordinance relating to appropriations, providing for the appropriation of monies for the city of Lakeland, Florida for various purposes for the fiscal year commencing October 1st, 2022 and ending September 30th, 2023, providing an effective date. And this, before there's a motion on that, this ordinance will need to be amended to reflect the reduction of the tentative millage rate, I believe, right? Are there some numbers that need to be adjusted? Teacher, you've got that?
Yeah, she's got it for you.
Okay, is there something you could put up on the overhead, or does this indicate where it's changed? I mean, if you could, just go ahead and put it on the overhead.
Right here.
Okay. It's 776 there. The 48. Okay, so with the reduction of the tentative millage rate, and bear with me for a second while I catch up with this. On page 4 of the budget ordinance, under property taxes, that figure goes from 51,971,120 to 48,978,325. And then on the very next page of the tentative budget ordinance, under surplus prior years, that figure goes from $4,646,935 to $7,639,730. Is that correct, Deidre? So those are the two changes in the budget ordinance that brings the budget ordinance into consistency with the millage rate, the tentative millage rate that you just adopted.
Yes.
So now we would need a motion in a second to
There's a motion
act
to
on that.
approve.
So moved.
Second?
And discussion by commissioners.
Yeah, if I need to see, where's it on here, so I can, what page or?
Okay, page 4 of the budget ordinance in your packet.
1A2?
So on page 4, under taxes, about halfway down, section 2, the property tax amount
49 million?
goes to $48,978,325. And this will all show up in the budget ordinance, the final budget ordinance that you will see. Yeah, it goes to, property taxes go to $48,978,325. And then on the very next page, contributions from other funds, right above the total amount at the bottom of the page, it says surplus prior years. That figure is going to $7,639,730.
$6,739,000?
7 million.
$7,639,730.
Right.
So that number, yeah.
So the motion would be to adopt proposed ordinance number 22-041 as just now modified at the dais.
Which we have had a motion made,
Motion and second.
seconded, okay?
Okay.
And with those numbers in it?
Yes.
And you agree with both those? Okay. All right, discussion by commissioners. Any discussion or questions by the audience? This is a roll call vote, so this is
Is
commission.
this a supermajority also?
No. This is just a majority.
No, it would be a supermajority. But it's the same, it's consistent with the millage rate ordinance that you just adopted, though.
If I voted no, I can vote no
Should be
again.
unanimous.
right?
Well,
I'm sorry?
If I voted no a while ago, I can vote no again. Makes sense.
Sure.
All right.
okay. We're starting with Commissioner Walker.
Aye.
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 No.
Aye.
Okay, so 6-1. All right. Other items of business.
That's all for tonight. The final budget hearing will be September 22nd in here at 6 p.m.
All right. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Appreciate you being here.
325.